Hi, I'm Tom Martin. I'm the CEO and founder of LawDroid, and we're a company dedicated to helping lawyers supercharge their law firms with the help of AI legal assistants that can help with everything from case law research to analyzing documents to even capturing new leads. The session you're about to watch first aired live at LawDroid's first annual AI conference. One thing I would ask of you is to please keep in touch with us. You can subscribe to lawdroidmanifesto.com, which is a newsletter where I can keep you updated about the latest developments in law and technology, and let you know about great events like this that'll keep you informed and that you can walk away from with actionable intelligence. Stay tuned.
Hi, everyone. Great to be here, and great to be alongside Damien, who I admire in all of his work that he's done. So yeah, such a pleasure to kind of take everyone through, where we're at now and where we're going.
Yeah, and Damien Riehl, and I'm similarly, I have a huge amount of respect for Megan and all the amazing things she's doing at Stanford. So you're going to hear a lot of the Mutual Admiration Society going on during this presentation, which I think is the way it should be. So, Megan, our focus here is to be able to talk about where have we been and where are we going. So there's a running bet I have with my people that I've been talking with who know what they're talking about, and you are certainly amongst them. Is 23 going to be busier or less busy than 24? Are we just getting ramped up, or is things going to be declining? What do you think?
I think we're certainly not going to be less busy, but I think it's going to be busy in a different way. And what I mean by that is when I look back on 2023, I would probably characterize the year as a dualism of fear and fascination. And kind of you can culminate that into this notion of exploration. So, what are we going to do with generative AI? And I think, as we talk more about it today, I think what we're arriving at is we're starting to enter into the stage of maturity. And with that comes, various steps that we need to take to kind of better characterize what is responsible use. We're already starting to see that with the EU AI Act kind of ringing in the 2024 year. And I think we're also going to see, a turn in the types of technologies that are being used, how we have to train the future of lawyers. And so as we think about these complex questions, I think we're going to be just as busy, but in a different way.
I think so too. Some people I respect put it in this way, saying that they think that in 23 we as an industry were waking up to the possibilities, and maybe in 24 we'll actually be implementing the things we've woken up to. And I think that's probably a good way to think about it. And there's certainly now it's given us a year plus since ChatGPT came on the scene in November 22 to get our data houses in order to be able to maybe tag things up better, to do better RAG on the back end. So anyway, so yeah, I think this year is going to be a lot of doing rather than just talking about it. Thinking about the state of the art, thinking about, of course, everything is based on the models. That is, what are the models that are being built? And of course, you have the commercial models and you have the open source models.
Mhm.
So I remember there was a talk between Pablo Redondo and John Ney, both of whom I respect and know. I know you know both of them too. There was a debate between them at the Legal Week last year, saying where Pablo was saying, he thinks that the commercial models are going to be much more advanced than the LLM, the open source models, and that the gap will be very significant. But John said, no, I think it'll just be pretty close. That there won't be that big of a gap between the two. And I wonder what you think about between the commercial models and the foundational models, how far that gap is going to continue to be.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. To be honest, I think the bigger issue is the trust around open source models. I think, to John's point, I see that there is very much a rapid ramp up that we've seen near the end of the year, especially with the introduction of Mistral and then Mixtral in particular. And we're starting to see, obviously, the way that you can fine tune these models. And when I say these models, I mean the open source models. You're getting actually results that are quite close to proprietary models. And of course, the regulation that's coming out, it's looking to kind of be more forgiving with open source models, so to speak, that because they publish their weights and things like that, and they can publish sort of a summary of their training data, that they don't have to be subject to the same requirements that these proprietary models, such as GPT-4 Vision and whatever is coming in the future and Claude 2. But I think at the end of the day, it's still a little bit of a mystery how they play out in the legal space. We haven't seen explicitly very many legal startups or players that have ventured down the open source path. And I think in part because people are still relatively, I think, muddied about what exactly are the security risks involved in using open source models. And I think until we have a better clarification, even if it's, the Spark notes to, the average legal professional, that's when I think we can really start to see that competitive difference. At the moment right now, I think we're still very much in a speculative space.
Yeah, and I think you're right. And of course, you have Meta Llama, the Meta Facebook putting out the Llama 2, which started this open source revolution. That essentially it's not the fruit of the poisonous tree, but the fruit of the beneficial tree that spawned all of these things going forward. And of course, now Zuckerberg just a few weeks ago, maybe last week, said that they're going to move forward with Llama 3 and they're going to continue on the open source path. So you have this idea of juggernauts like Microsoft and Google with their proprietary models, and then Meta kind of pushing the open standard, which will then allow Mixtral and the others to be able to go in Llama's wake. I guess with that, I'm maybe more optimistic about the open source if they have the money of Facebook Meta behind it to be able to essentially keep the proprietary and the open source similar in capabilities.
Yeah. I mean, one other sort of on that path is people often think about kind of this legal space and they ask about what exactly is the moat. I mean, I was on a panel kind of late last year with Pablo, and we discussed exactly this question. And so you have this beautiful analogy where you sort of describe data as oil. And so I'm a little bit curious about what your thoughts are on this. Is, data really still the space that is kind of the moat at the moment for legal startups or for folks that want to kind of enter this vertical?
Yeah, and for the benefit of whoever's editing this view, I'd like to share my my screen, and it looks like the host has disabled the screen sharing. So for now, I'm going to describe what the data as oil is, but maybe perhaps Tom, if you're on, we could be able to allow screen sharing, and it looks like we are now able to do that. So I'm now sharing my screen to be able to say that data is the new oil. We've known that for decades, but you have to extract that oil, then refine it. Is it going to be gasoline or jet fuel? You have to pipe it to customers. If it's plastic, is it a toy? Is it a water bottle? And then you get it to market. And so, of course, with legal data, there's government data. That is, there is government oil, government statutes, regulations, court motions, briefs, pleadings, orders, opinions. And then you have private oil. You have what were the settlements for litigation? What are the contracts between private companies? So between the public oil and private oil, you still have to extract that data. And then refining it used to take thousands of people. That is, you used to have 3,000 people in the bowels of Thomson Reuters tagging up and summarizing all of these data. But it turns out you don't need that anymore, especially with Sally, which I help lead, to be able to say that maybe these are the tags that can be done programmatically using a large language model. And now with that well-tagged data, you have to decide, is it going to be piped to my customers as a website, or is it going to be piped to my customers as an API, raw data feed? Turns out that coding up both of those things is relatively easy with Codex and with GitHub Copilot. And then you have to decide what to build. That is, you have to have lawyers saying, what are my pain points? And you have to have product people saying, how do we address those pain points? And you have to have UX people to say, this needs to be dead simple because lawyers are used to Apple. So that is the product. And then, of course, always you have sales, reputation, relationships as you go to market. So as we think about moats, there's still a huge moat on the oil side. That is, to extract Pacer to download all the documents would be about $2 billion with a B. Nobody's going to spend $2 billion. So that is a major moat. The biggest players are downloading a bunch of those, but they haven't done $2 billion. But then to refine it, and if you have a company that is merely refining, that is tagging or summarizing, there's no moat there. This is really, that cost is dropped to zero. Pipeline, that cost is dropped to zero. But strangely, the number of lawyers that know product, there aren't many people to be able to do this, to be able to identify the pain points and figure out what the product is to be able to make those pain points easier and make the US, there's still a big moat there. And then, of course, it's always about sales, reputation, relationships. So really, I think the moats continue to be the oil. And of course, we know Mike Listner and the Free Law Project doing some good things on maybe making a pacer alternative to be able to say that maybe that court data will come down a bit, or maybe to be free. But at least for now, I think there's still moat. And I'd be interested, Megan, I don't think you and I have talked about this idea, but what do you think of this? Is it accurate, or how can it be improved?
Honestly, I think you're spot on here. And I think one of the things I frequently think about is, the types of sort of shifts in the market in the coming year. I know that what we've seen is that there are a lot of players that have been kind of leaning on the Free Law Project, actually, these emerging players. But over time, we've seen a little bit of the incumbents kind of sweeping in and scooping up some of these mavericks. And so I think in the coming year, it's going to be interesting. Are you building with kind of the expectation that you'll be acquired eventually? Or are you building kind of to be, I guess, that one true maverick or that unicorn that's about to emerge? And especially kind of given these costs associated with data. So I think that's other than that, I see this pipeline as kind of perfectly spot on.
Yeah, it's something that I had in a fever dream at one point. I had to quickly throw it onto a PowerPoint. But yeah, I think that there's really anyone who's trying to put a wrapper around large language models, saying that we can be able to do legal things just because I can prompt GPT. You can prompt GPT, I can prompt GPT, right? That is not a moat. Really, the oil is where the moat is, and then the product is where the moat is.
Yeah. And I mean, you raise a really strong point, especially about sort of lawyers being able to play this product role and trying to understand and unpack what exactly are the pain points. And what we are seeing is that actually some of the earliest legal tech, kind of, when I say legal tech, I mean the ones that are leveraging generative AI and some of these foundation models. This past year, we've seen a number of them actually not have very many experienced lawyers on their founding team. And then we've seen sort of kind of that peter out kind of near the end of the year. And so I think in the coming year, we're starting to really think more seriously what exactly are the use cases that have the highest levels of viability here. And I know, of course, everyone's been talking about e-discovery, and we see a lot of players kind of investing in e-discovery. I'm curious to hear sort of your thoughts on what you think are not only coming use cases and like the highest value use cases, but what do you think is kind of foreseeable?
Yeah, I think that I think you're right, first of all, about the not having a lawyer on the product team is a really bad idea, because you can imagine that I used to work for a legal tech company whose name I'm not going to mention, and this is not at all about that company. But you can imagine that large legal tech companies might hire people right out of law school that have never practiced before, and then push them up in the ranks. And then in their development team, you can imagine them developing something. Wouldn't this be great for lawyers? And then they roll it out to the lawyers, and the lawyers like, no, this doesn't solve a problem for us. And then going back and then saying, how about this? And like, better, but it's still not great. So I think that if you are a legal tech founder, you should really get a lawyer on there that has actually been in the trenches, because then you won't be spinning up a lot of whiteboard time, wasting time on something that actually is not valuable, that lawyers will not pay for. Lawyers are notoriously cheap, that they do not want to pay for things, and unless it makes them money. And they're happy to spend their clients' money, but they are not willing to spend their money unless they make money. So really, you don't want to waste those cycles on the whiteboard cycles on something that lawyers who are generally tight-fisted will not want to spend money on. So anyway, that's thing number one on the product team having a lawyer. Thing number two on really excitement. I think there is excitement in e-discovery, largely because they already have the data scientists in place. They already have been thinking about ML, machine learning, for a long time. And so, of course, large language models are just an extension of that ML. They've also been thinking about metadata a lot. What are the things that matter? And so really connecting the metadata with the large language models is a form of RAG, to be retrieval augmented generation, to be able to say, what is the subset of the things that matter, and then give me an answer based on that subset. So yeah, I think e-discovery has probably got a head start on this, but that of course is private oil. The e-discovery is private oil. They don't have connections to the public oil. They don't say, here's a hot document that violates this statute. They can't make that connection without the public oil. I guess, what do you think about e-discovery and the other use cases?
Well, I think that it seems that e-discovery, again, as you're saying, it sort of points to a natural fit. It's almost like accelerating what the foundation's already there. It's just kind of the additional layer that's going to be a time saver. And, I don't think that you'll be spending a lot of, precious first year associate time kind of clicking through those documents. But actually something that you mentioned just before you touched on e-discovery made me think about, what are the types of, I guess, things that we need to think about as we retrofit almost the legal architecture with, generative AI. And, when you mentioned that a legal tech startup might approach a lawyer and say, like, is this better? And then keep going on these iterations, this whiteboarding process. I think sometimes what I think about is a lot of lawyers maybe don't even know fully or can't articulate fully what is the pain point that they've been facing, because there is so much drudgery in the kind of paperwork. And we've learned to sort of live with our tools. And I think that that is a particularly strange thing about the industry, is that, for a long time, we've just forced ourselves to almost enjoy Microsoft Word. And we've kind of found these little tips and tricks that over time, I think it was hard to let go. And I think is particularly that as an issue of, why we haven't been able to tackle head on, like, what are seriously things that we can change about, what we've always done in practice that could actually simplify our lives. And, yesterday I had a conversation with someone that was reminiscing about, being in rooms during e-discovery where it was just walls and walls of paper. And they were going through, maritime cases where they were reading captain's diaries manually. And, all of that went away when the first e-discovery tools came on board. And so naturally, we're just kind of in this weird transition where we're moving into, a new realm of what these tools could do for our practice. We just have to realize that, it's just like email, it's just like cloud compute. This is the next stage. So I'm curious to kind of, hear you talk more about that, because I know that we've had this conversation before.
Yeah, I think that you're right. And one of the funniest things that came out of my time working at Thomson Reuters is the cartoon that you're seeing right here that a colleague shared with me, which epitomizes what we as a legal profession do. Right, we are spending those hours of drudgery, essentially doing things, and we don't typically take the time to be able to make things faster, better, stronger for ourselves. So that is, I guess, the legal tech of years gone by. But I think we're changing that now. I think that the world has woken up to ChatGPT because they're now, within a few months had 100 million users. So a lot of lawyers have actually used it and said, wow, this is actually a big deal. So I think for the first time over the past year, lawyers are actually asking their innovation people, hey, can we use these things? Whereas in the years gone by, it's like, oh yeah, that's stop bothering me because I'm trying to drag my cart through the sand. So I think that that we have a really good opportunity, not only to be able to do large language model tools within law firms and within in-house counsel, but also to be able to say, well, while I have you, yes, we're going to do these LLM things, but here's how we can put our data house in order. This is how we could be able to put metadata structure together. This is how we can be able to have good governance of our documents in a way that will help the large language models. And by the way, we actually have this tool that we rolled out 3 years ago that you didn't come to the training for, that is actually going to answer, this is an AI, but not a neural net AI, but a symbolic AI that we've actually been coding up. So I think that this is a great opportunity because of the PR that ChatGPT has done, and people want to have AI solutions, but they don't really care if they're symbolic AI or neural net AI.
Yeah, and as you're talking about that, I know you're a bit of a fan of this, so I'm curious, to hear more about your thoughts. But I see this year as a lot of sort of reconciling, what is existing in my portfolio of tools that I use, and, how does generative AI kind of naturally fit into this? I often hear about questions on deployment and integration, and there seems to be this kind of sort of tension that goes, is generative AI kind of that tool that's going to kind of be that Swiss Army knife that takes over all of the other existing tools? Or is there some sort of synergy that we need to start learning about? And of course, I think we're probably both of the opinion of the latter, that we need to start thinking about sort of these hybrid modes or hybrid models. And so I'm fascinated by kind of, how do you see these this piecing together kind of, symbolic AI with neural AI? Obviously, Google DeepMind recently had a paper called Alpha Geometry, which talked exactly about kind of the power of leveraging, deduction engines and kind of then balancing them with neural nets. So yeah.
Yeah, those who attended ILTACon 2022, so it was July of 22, just a few months before ChatGPT came out. Pablo Redondo and I were on a panel together where name of the panel was knowledge graphs like Sally versus neural nets. And I said to Pablo before during the preparation, I said, let's make this like a celebrity death match where we go to the death as to symbolic AI or neural net AI. But at the end of the preparatory session and during the presentation, actually we agreed with each other more than we disagreed, because you need to be able to have the knowledge graphs of the symbolic AI to be able to work in conjunction with the large language model. And an example of that is if you were to ask a large language model alone, give me what are the odds of winning a motion for summary judgment in the Southern District of New York before Judge Smith? It's going to make stuff up, and it's just not going to have the data to do that. But if you tag up using Sally tags, motion for summary judgment in the Southern District of New York before Judge Smith, you'll have very high accuracy of that. So that will give you analytics in a way that neural nets cannot. And then once you have the analytics there, now I have the 50 motions for summary judgment that this judge has ruled on summary judgment for contract cases, for example. Those 50 can now serve as retrieval augmented generation to be able to say, now based on this, let's go ahead and use the neural net to create a new motion for summary judgment that is statistically likely to win for this judge, for this motion type, for this cause of action. So in this way, it's neural nets and symbolic AI, not them separately. And I think that the Google DeepMind is a good example of that, of them realizing that you need the reasoning that is the traditional reasoning, and large language models built atop that. But I'd be interested in your thoughts. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you're spot on in the sense that there are parts of the law that are actually very heavily structured already. And if we see like the way that, we structure our legal documents, contracts in particular, it's very clear that there is a logic backbone, even with legal briefs and all other kind of, the span of our texts. And even with the Sally tags, we, naturally have a taxonomy that we've built over the years. And so why not leverage that? I think that at the end of the day, most people have realized in this past year that these models are, at the end of the day, built on statistical and probabilistic foundations, and that if there are certain points where you need that level of accuracy, it's not going to get there. And yes, we have RAG, and it's going to do its best, but we'll come to a very realistic machine limitation there. And so being able to find these bridges, I certainly think that that's going to be coming this year. And I think it'll activate kind of what we call the future of computational law.
I 100% agree. Just today, I was meeting with 3 law firms about Sally, and I have a game that I play with the law firms that I show Sally to called Stump the Chump, where I say, go ahead and give me a term, a legal term, and we'll see if Sally has it or not in its 14,000 Sally tags. And usually it's really good, but today they stumped the chump where we had not yet in Sally had terms like prior art or fair use. And so after I got off those calls, I added fair use and prior art to these things. These are all structures. And as you think about what is prior art and fair use, they are both things that you do on the regulatory side. That is, I need to be, I as a regulator have to look at prior art to see if a patent is going to go through, and et cetera. So that is something I do on the regulatory side, but it is also a defense. For a patent infringement lawsuit, that there is prior art. And so this idea is that we already have a taxonomy that we've been talking about for decades, maybe hundreds of years, that murder is a concept. And so each of these things, if you make up a new term for a legal term, you're not going to win because nobody will know what you're talking about. There are names for all of these things. Almost all of those names are in Sally. And yeah, I think that we can be able to use that as a reasoning engine on top with the large language models to be able to fuel as we go forward. Something I've been thinking about that I'd like to ask you about is that a lot of people have, poor Steve Schwartz for hallucinating the case, right? I have sympathy for Steve Schwartz. I think Steve Schwartz is the only person in the world that doesn't have a Steve Schwartz to look to use an example of what not to do. So anyway, so now that Steve Schwartz is out there, everybody else is kind of unfair game. But what Steve didn't realize that many people are starting to is that this is not a retrieval engine. Large language models, the foundational models cannot retrieve. But retrieval, of course, can be done through RAG, but you also have the ideation engine and the reasoning engine. So I'd be interested in your thoughts on reasoning and ideation in addition to retrieval summary. How did those 3 play together, and how could we be able to think through ideation and reasoning in addition to the retrieval?
Yeah, I think Well, first of all, it's a great question. Second, with ideation, I always found that actually that is one of the best use cases for generative AI, in part because we do this, actually in a very analog way. We have our yellow notepads. And the thing is that they may not necessarily be accurate and totally correct at all times. We're just trying to build out what we want as an argument. And I think having that scratch pad, but being able to unlock more universes of experience, that's really how I see the power of these models. What I always kind of share is that a lot of what the value, I think, from the legal space is it's that advisory, it's that narrative component that a senior lawyer can offer. But they can really only speak to their own experiences. And so you have this sort of natural knowledge share that you might have with your close colleagues. You might know someone in litigation, or you might know someone that is in a very specific sort of patent litigation, for example. And you might have to do these kind of one-off consultations just to double check, like, have I done kind of, what's your perspective on this? And now with these models, what we're doing is we're unlocking all these universes of knowledge, and we're able to do that kind of very quickly in a triaging manner. So in the ideation space, this is kind of ideal. But sort of further to sort of the retrieval space, actually, I mean, prior to kind of the explosion of ChatGPT, NLP was starting, especially legal NLP, because they leveraged sort of labeled data already, such as Sally, they were getting to a level that was fairly, you know, appreciable. And especially, they've been working very closely with relevance as a huge factor. And I think that with large language models, there's still a bit of, I guess, a gap when it comes to, two areas, reliability and relevance. And I think people overlook relevance sometimes, but I think over the years, Google, for example, has perfected what relevance looks like. And so I think going back to even traditional NLP, when we think about questions of retrieval, that to me is something that I think about a lot. And I think to your sort of broader question is how do we actually lay out the workflow at this point, right? And to me, I think ideation, no doubt, we should be thinking about how to plug in large language models. When it comes to kind of retrieval, I think I would still rely on to some extent, neural nets, but also plugging in kind of that existing taxonomy, and especially some of the rules that are already out there. And I think this ties very closely with the reasoning engine. At Codex, we talk a lot about computable contracts and this idea of computational law. And really, it's being able to verify against very specified rules and explicit rules. And we have those analog versions of it. I think we just haven't thought about it in a kind of digital space. And this is the year that we're kind of doing that.
Yeah, I think so too. And thinking about the ideation, I litigated for about 15 years. And so one of the partners that I litigated with said, the best ideas come to me as I am not even hand on keyboard. I'm just looking back and thinking about what are good ways I can win this case. And I think that clients aren't paying for us to do this anymore, but the large language models could be able to essentially be a more effective way to be able to do that. So you could be able to say, rather than doing this, you could say, give me 15 potential arguments, or 20, or 100, or 300, right? And then I pick out the best of those. And so I would bet that out of those 300 are many more that you can get in 5 minutes than that lawyer sitting back and ideating and doing that manually. So I think that ideation is an underrepresented use case for large language models. So I think I think you're right. And, I'm building a tool right now that is, you can ingest a motion and say, give me 25 counter arguments on this, and it will spit out 25. Give me 25 more, right? This is not rocket science. You just need the oil of that motion to be able to go forward and be able to create that ideation. The second thing, let's talk a bit about ethics. I'd be interested in your thoughts on, we've been down this road before. Email. I'm old enough to say that in the 1990s, when I started practicing law, people say you can't use email for transmitting client information because every hop along the email server, somebody could snoop in, and this is a cybersecurity risk. Then everybody used it, and now it's okay, right? Cell phones, you can't use it because every hop along the cell tower, you can eavesdrop. Everybody used it, now it's okay. Same thing. I'm never going to go to the cloud. I need to have that server in my place, but of course, now it's okay. Where are we going to go from here, right? Ethics is the thing. I guess the question for you is how long before we get to everybody using it and then everybody saying it okay? Is that this year? Is it next year? Is it 10 years from now? What do you think?
Yeah, I think for me, this is somewhat of a complicated question, such that I think at the end of the day, a lot of, at the end of it, this transition to everybody using it requires some level of broader trust. And for whatever reason, I think because it comes from the ancestry of machine learning specifically, unlike kind of, other analogs like email and cloud compute, they didn't really have kind of a pattern to follow. It's because I think for many, machine learning comes with, all of the dialogue of bias and fairness and transparency. This is just sort of aggregated and accelerated. And so for a lot of kind of folks that are hesitant to use this technology, that's kind of this origin of some of that fear, right? And then it's sort of coupled with, hallucination and kind of then the kind of New York Times breaking about, lawyers that are misusing the technology. But I think you're right that we are going to get to a level of comfortability. I'm not sure if it's necessarily in this coming year, but I think in part, one thing I always think about is that in the practical guidance that was recently sort of adopted by the State Bar of California, they talk about the duty of competence. This is very much pronounced in the medical field, but we don't really see that a lot in the legal field. And so what I really think is going to be a pivotal moment is when we start thinking about whether or not lawyers need to keep abreast of new technologies. And if we have this kind of duty counterbalanced with, our attorney-client privilege, our fiduciary care, all of these other duties, then I think we will start approaching closer and closer to kind of the susceptibility or broad acceptability of the use of generative AI.
Yeah, imagine going to a doctor and that doctor saying, I still practice medicine like I did in the 2007. I'm not going to use any of these fancy blinky things that everybody else does. That's malpractice, right? That is malpractice. So I guess the real question is, if I spend 10 hours on a task that should take me 5 minutes, not only do we have the ethical rule of competence, which is true, we also have the ethical duty to not overcharge our clients. And so is spending 10 hours on what could be done in 5 minutes, is that a breach of my ethical duty of charging my client a fair wage or a fair rate? And I think that, I would hope that, if any, and we already have these decisions where if you do e-discovery on paper, the court said, no, that is sanctionable. Like you need to do it electronically. If you don't check your email, courts have said, no, that is not your duty of competence. So I think it is only a matter of time before, if you don't use the large language model, it is breaching your duty of competence and breaching your duty of being able to do charge your client a fair rate. The question is just when. Is it 5 years, 10 years, or is it next year?
Yeah, and part of what you're mentioning just now is kind of reminding me of a conversation I've had with a professor at the University of Toronto, Abdi Adid. He had mentioned, I think law is a field that hasn't had that empirical turn. And so in part, kind of lawyers, to your point about how you bill, that's somewhat of a mystery, I think, for most people. They just know that lawyers are expensive. But really kind of understanding what the metrics of quality legal work are, it's still kind of very much a myth to many people. I think even lawyers themselves, they have difficulty saying this is a good contract, this is a great contract. And I think actually generative AI is at a stage of revealing some of that messiness and kind of giving sort of a quantitative, anchoring to kind of how we're not only pricing the products, but also actually giving us a reason to make the law more accessible for everyone.
100%. And really, there's a really big debate amongst contract lawyers that I know. During negotiations, they argue what's market for this industry, what's the market for this particular agreement type. And of course, the first stage to that is that you could tag up the industry. You could tag up the document type. And once you've tagged it up, you could be able to use RAG to say truly what is market, right? You could be able to say with actual statistics, not just anecdata, but true data, what is truly market. And so this is a way to elicit what everyone has said gut instinct, like you and I can argue about what's market, but the devil is in the data, right? So if you could use the data to tag up all of the force majeure clauses in the entertainment industry in Mozambique, then you could truly see what's market for that kind of language. Knowing we have not that much time left, I want to ask you a question question about what's coming down the pike.
Mhm.
So let's start with multimodal and then end with agency. Multimodal, for those who don't know, is right now we have text, but you could also imagine having images and also audio. So the large language models and generative AI generally would be able to use all three of those. What do you think is going to come down the pike for legal applications to this multimodal text plus images plus audio?
Yeah, so I think that some of the biggest benefits around multimodal come in the place of access to justice. And I think for me, it started with sort of this viral tweet that came out where someone took a picture of a complex parking sign. I feel like we've all been there where we're not totally sure whether or not we've parked at the right time, the right place. And so basically GPT-4 Vision was able to unpack that and say, this is actually, you're parked at the right place. Don't worry about it. And I think we're starting to see some applications or lend itself into insurance, first of all. If you kind of take pictures of a particular collision and you can kind of unpack that and be able to say, hey, like I am covered or I'm not covered. And I think it's going to emerge into, maybe landlord-tenant disputes. If, you see sort of mold, you can take pictures and quickly have reasoning on it. I think that is going to be areas, I think, of particular interest in multimodal. I know that you have some other examples, so I'd love to hear more about them and what your thoughts are on multimodal.
Yeah, I think that there are lots of use cases with multimodal, one of which a lawyer out of New York that I'm not going to name, but he's brilliant. He said, what if we could impeach in real time? That is during the witness. What if you could do voice recognition, that is the audio, and then translate that to speech to text, and then prompt, say, find contradictory evidence in the entire record. That is in all the discovery, all the depositions, all the declarations, all the pleadings. And this is real-time impeachment. I used to do trial work and you used to have throngs of associates doing this. And if you're lucky, you could get the associate at the end of the day to be able to find where they said whatever it was last October. But this in real time, you could actually be able to say, as a solo small lawyer, well, you just said this, but in October at line 35 of page 27, didn't you say the exact opposite? Let me read this to you. This real-time impeachment, that is an amazing thing that we can do today, really. So I think that's just one example. Another is that I can interview my client, and this goes to your access to justice. During the client interview, do a transcription, and then say, turn this into a complaint, turn this into a motion to dismiss, integrate these facts into any number of documents. So integrate these facts into a complaint before the administrative agency that is doing housing. So I think access to justice has a huge benefit for this multimodal because people communicate in words, audio, and that transferring is, I think, could be a great advance.
Absolutely. I am amazed at that example that you brought up in terms of real-time impeachment. I've been thinking a lot about kind of how multimodal is great with memory specifically, and which is a clear limitation for most humans. So being able to have kind of at your fingertips the entire timeline at all times, that's brilliant.
Yeah, it's really exciting. So let's talk in the very few minutes we have left about agency. And those who don't know, agency is what Sam Altman and others say that you might be able to have a large language model like tool go out into the world and do your bidding. That is to be able to say, go create a business idea, get some AdWords, make some sales, and then if you have any questions, come let me know. But otherwise, go ahead and do this work. That is called agency. What do you think about the likelihood of agency happening, and two, all the bad things that can happen with laws being broken with agency, and maybe ways to remedy that? What do you think?
Yeah, I think the rise of agents is definitely coming. I think in part because we do have the infrastructure in place already, given how these models are able to interact with one another. We've seen a ton of viral papers come out on sort of what they call generative agents, where these models learn how to cooperate and work together in a way. So we're going to see how these models can sort of almost coordinate to be able to verify and continuously monitor, basically, whether or not something is in compliance with the law. I think, again, the biggest question, and going back to sort of an earlier discussion we have, is data as the moat. And I think that that's going to be the biggest hurdle. But the actual architecture, the infrastructure, I think that that's definitely in place. We just need to put it into practice in terms of how we want these agents to almost automatically verify. And then we can kind of start lending ourselves into a space of, supervisory agents. This is something that, John May has been working on. Can you have almost automated regulatory compliance? And so that's kind of I think, what will be coming in this space for sure.
And that's 100% right. And yeah, I really admire John and the work that he's doing. And I know that you're working a bit with him too. So that's I admire you too. And when Sam Altman says we need alignment with human values, my first response is we've had that for about 700 years. It's called the law, right? And so that's the best way we as society have said that here are our values: don't murder, don't steal. We put them into code, and then we kind of agree upon them. But the real question is, I have a friend who works for a cloud storage provider, and she's in charge of pulling down, child sexual exploitative materials and Nazi paraphernalia. But she says that I can either comply with German law that says I need to take Nazi stuff down, or I can comply with Texas law saying I need to keep Nazi stuff up. I can't do both. And so my question for Sam Altman is, is alignment with human values, is that German values or is that Texas values? Because we really need to do that. So I think that the work that John is doing is we could maybe have a normalized view of what Germany and Texas and every other jurisdiction, what is the normalized of the least worst option for my friend? That is, what is going to get me in the least amount of trouble and what is the least amount of fines across all the jurisdictions. And the only way for that really to work is for the law to be free. That is for German law to be free and for French law to be free and for US law to be free. So that way we can create a legal large language model to be have all these agents as they go out and do the work to consult the legal oracle to say what's the least bad. And if bad things happen, if you're going to harm a human, then and harm a human as represented in German laws and as represented in Texas laws, then you go to a human, and that's a human in the loop to do that. So I really admire John and you for doing this work.
Yeah, and I think, what's most fascinating is that we haven't really been able to compare well across jurisdictions before. And so what you're mentioning here is actually a real-time comparison of these laws that are sort of, largely opaque for most of the time. We're kind of doing this guessing game, but the other side of it is actually having more control of when you want human intervention. And I think right now we haven't been as measured about, this is obviously what will defer for machines to do, and this is where humans. With agents, I think that that's actually more of a almost natural process where you can see sort of where you need that secondary review. And so this is sort of what's to me most exciting about it. I think the other part that you're mentioning that's particularly exciting is almost these simulations and being able to play out the right strategies. I'm not sure that we've been able to do that well. And I think some of the research that we've been working on, at least for training future lawyers, is to almost teach them how to simulate contract negotiations or simulate litigation strategy. And I think very clearly agents are going to contribute to that.
I 100% agree. And I've actually built a tool that you can put a proposition, and then I have the large language model find cases, statutes, regulations that argue against that proposition. And I just this morning made a way that you can upload an entire brief and say, give me the other side of the argument for this, not just to be able to argue against the other side, but also if I want to shadow box with myself to say before the other side even files their brief, I want to see where are the weaknesses so I can cut the other side off at the pass. So this idea of shadow boxing using a large language model, I think we ain't seen nothing yet.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. So I know that we are almost out of time. I could talk with you for hours and hours, and maybe we will. But Megan, really, thank you so much for the time that you've given and for what you've given to the field. It's really amazing.
Honestly, the pleasure is all mine. And to be honest, I could get the sense that we were just getting started. So the pleasure, I think, is all mine here. And as I said in the beginning, I have deep admiration for the work that you've done, and especially what you've built over the years with Sally. You kind of really enumerated and mentioned explicitly kind of these taxonomies that we've already known implicitly. So yeah, what a privilege to be able to do this.
We'll have to get together this Mutual Admiration Society again. Maybe Tom, you'll invite us out next year. But I think with that, we can go to the live Q&A.
That was another great session from LawDroid's first annual AI conference. Thank you so much for watching. Please keep in touch. Subscribe at lawdroidmanifesto.com, where I can keep you updated about the latest developments at the intersection of law and technology, and let you know about great events like this. Keep in touch.